Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video by Scully. In this video I wanted to talk about a symptom that's actually pretty common with a lot of different types of mental illnesses, but it's also not very well understood. I wanted to talk about dissociation and derealization. So derealization and dissociation probably happen really to quite a lot of us at some point in our lives, usually pretty mild. If you're ever watching a movie and you find yourself having to rewind it because you missed something that somebody was saying because you're kind of spacing out in the middle of it, that is a form of dissociation, and that's one that really everybody gets. It's very, very common. But then, of course, there are ones that are more severe, and if they're severe enough to the point of affecting your day-to-day life, like being able to be productive at work and being able to remember things, then that can become more of a problem pretty quickly. So derealization and dissociation, they're a little bit different from each other. They're very similar, but their difference is kind of not only in severity, but also kind of just the disconnection feeling. Because derealization is a form of dissociation, but we kind of tend to see that one more with somebody who's really anxious or stressed out. And you're not really supposed to be stressed out or anxious for a long period of time. If you do, it starts to really wreak havoc on your body. Your memory starts to get really bad, and you start to get really fatigued, and it affects your appetite, sleep, you get heart palpitations, things like that. It's very bad on your body long term, because you're usually in the fight or flight response when you have anxiety. Your body's in panic mode. And although that works in terms of danger and escaping from things, again, it's not supposed to be long term. Your body's not really meant to handle that for a super long period of time. Hence why all those things can occur as a result. So if you think about something kind of like that, that's kind of where derealization kicks in. Because if you are stressed or anxious for a long period of time, your body is going to want to try to find a way to adapt to that or cope with it. And with derealization, you'd kind of be more disconnected, kind of spaced out from everything. Because with derealization, it's like this, I describe it as kind of like this floaty, far away feeling. Mentally, you feel very disconnected from everything, but physically your body is still in the present, like in the here and now. So derealization could kick in if you're stressed for a long period of time as your body's way to cope with it. Because if you're feeling far away and kind of spaced out, you're not directly thinking about what you're stressed out about. Like, your mind feels more disconnected. So your body would do that as a way to kind of try to relieve some of that stress. And it may not even relieve all of it, but that is your body's way of kind of trying to kind of like adjust and accommodate that level of stress that you're not really supposed to be in all the time. So it can be a little overwhelming to feel derealization. Like, if you look back on it later and think, oh my gosh, I felt so disconnected, I felt so spaced out, I felt like I wasn't even there. Well, especially in various situations, that can be very scary, because you definitely don't want to feel that way when you're driving or doing something very important. So especially in situations like that, it can be very, very scary. Derealization is usually pretty manageable too. It can be very different when you kind of first experiencing it, but once you kind of have it for a long enough period of time, you do kind of start to notice when it's happening. And there are some things you can do, like some grounding techniques that are pretty simple, but they might take some kind of repetition to kind of see what works for you and everything. But it's actually quite a useful tactic for a lot of things, including derealization. But it's called grounding techniques. You could be sitting in a chair somewhere, and you could just kind of rub your fingers on little fabric and kind of focus not only like what does it feel like, what does it look like. You can rub your feet on the ground, kind of bearing weight, putting like part of your body on the ground to kind of remember, like, if you're bearing weight on your feet, obviously that means you're somewhere doing something. Kind of snap your brain out of it a little bit and kind of be like, hey, brain, we're right here. Let's focus on the here and now. And you can use it with a lot of your senses too, like smells, sounds, like if there's music playing around you, or maybe if you're looking at a color of something that's hanging on the wall, or maybe if you're out shopping and there's usually a lot of things on display like clothes and stuff, and you can kind of look at those and kind of distract yourself and different things work for different people, depending on if you're a visual person or auditory person, or if you are somebody who likes fabrics and textures on things. So those different kind of variables can affect what may work for you versus something else. And they're usually very good techniques once you get used to it. It's kind of just getting into the process of just kind of reminding yourself, like, okay, I feel myself spacing out. I'm just gonna put my hand on this for a second, and oh yeah, that feels pretty real, and you kind of start focusing on that more, and it kind of just gradually brings your brain back to reality. It's like, metaphorically speaking, you feel yourself floating away, and it's like pulling reality back to you versus the other way around. So once you kind of do that enough, it becomes more instinctual, and it becomes pretty therapeutic. Okay, so that's pretty understandable. Well, what about dissociation? Yeah, dissociation is pretty tricky. I mentioned previously how, we all kind of do it to some degree. Some people kind of daydream pretty willingly too, and again, that's usually pretty mild. But with really severe dissociation, it can onset pretty suddenly, and depending on certain trauma-related disorders, especially if there's something recurrent, that's kind of, your brain is kind of more acclimated to doing that, where if you feel a lot of stress, your brain may just kind of do that more automatically because it's kind of been conditioned over a long period of time. So that can make it very hard to snap out of. I mean, with certain things like, especially like post-traumatic stress disorder too, part of it could be like stress related, but also just, again, coping with a various like kind of situation that maybe happened or has happened ongoing. So your brain may kind of space out more automatically, and you may not have a lot of control over it. And that one can be very tough to deal with, not only with just important things like work, but it can also interfere with relationships. And if you have dissociation badly enough where you have hours or days that you don't remember anything, that can especially be problematic, because if you have a lot going on in your life, and if you're somebody who is very dependable for a lot of things, if you can't remember things, not only is that an issue in terms of your day-to-day life and routine, but then there's also the big question of like, okay, you realize there's 3 days you can't remember anything. Well, what was going on at that time? And then of course that's going to drive you crazy because you can't remember, and other people may not understand either. They might just be like, how do you not remember that? And you can't explain it to them. So not only is it frustrating from your day-to-day life, but also because other people, they're not always very sympathetic if they don't understand it. And then, of course, explaining it to them is even more trickier because you don't know if they'll understand or not. So yeah, with dissociation, I feel like that's kind of more of really kind of like, if it, in extreme situations, kind of almost blacking out and not remembering any of it. And yes, there are things that can cause that, like drinking a lot of alcohol can cause that, because that can damage your brain, especially from severe dehydration. And there's sort of other substances that can do things like that. And then, again, other disorders that can cause that too. And sometimes those disorders can be difficult to pinpoint, because if you don't remember what's going on when you're dissociating, if you don't know how long it's been going on for, and you kind of come back at an unexpected time, it's kind of hard to see a professional kind of explain everything that's going on if you don't remember any of it. So even getting diagnosed with disorders like that can be very tricky if you don't have a lot of recollection as to what's going on during those times. So with dissociating, they kind of try some of the grounding and stuff if you kind of, like, if you've had it long enough and you're kind of used to it. If you can kind of feel it starting to happen, you can kind of start doing those grounding techniques, and sometimes they may be very helpful. Other times it may happen more suddenly, and it could be kind of a matter of kind of like, if it happens very regularly, if you're able to kind of journal when it happens, and if you kind of keep that little journal with you, not only is it really helpful in terms of keeping track of things in your day-to-day life, like a little to-do list, you can kind of reference that in terms of, like, if your most recent entry, if you remember writing that down, but then maybe you don't remember writing anything after that, maybe if you wrote something down during that, maybe you can kind of remember what was going on at that time. And even if you don't remember, you could still read it later and be like, okay, well, I don't remember what happened within this 2-hour gap, but apparently from what I wrote here, I made dinner or I did the laundry. So it's kind of like putting those little check marks on your little to-do list. So even if you don't remember doing it, you can still kind of find a way to keep up that communication with yourself and kind of stay on top of it. That way you can kind of keep track of not only when that kind of stuff is happening in the journal, but also the things you maybe did during it. So you don't have to do the same thing twice, or you don't have to worry about, I mean, you don't want to like leave the stove on or anything like that. And you don't want to put yourself in dangerous situations during that on accident. So if you kind of really just keep track of yourself during that time period and kind of find ways to really kind of fill in those gaps as much as you can kind of maybe not only keep an eye on that, but also increase the amount of communication you're having with yourself and how your body works, and really just figuring out what works and what doesn't. And that's always the hardest part with mental illness, because most people go into these conditions they have blindfolded, like they don't know what's going on, and it's very confusing. So although learning more about yourself during these can be very aggravating, very long process that's hard to have a lot of patience with, it is also one of the things that seems to work the best. Because at the end of the day, you know yourself better than anybody else. You're there with yourself really all the time. And as much as it would be easier to have somebody kind of keeping track of it, sometimes you have to be your own private investigator. You have to write your own book. You have to be your own advocate, and you have to be your own support system sometimes. And as overwhelming as that can also be very empowering. Because if you do go to a doctor for certain treatments, or if you're really kind of unsure about things, you can really listen to yourself and think, well, I don't know if this treatment's working for me, or, I've had some luck with this in the past. Maybe this treatment will work better. And with that, you're giving yourself a voice, and you're giving yourself the opportunity to grow, to get better, to heal, and to function as best as you can your way. Because everybody lives their life differently. Everybody has their own beat, and that's okay. Because other people may be deaf to your own tune, but you know what it sounds like, and you know what makes you tick. And if you're somebody who's going through things like this, it can be very scary, and it can be very frustrating. But just take some time, just kind of see what works. And if things don't work the first time, just keep trying, because something will work. Sadly, these things don't get solved overnight, but with your diligence, with your hard work, and the effort you're making, give yourself a pat on the back for the things that you do. And when you find the thing that works, just keep doing it, just keep trying, and you'll get through this. Until then, have a great day, guys.